Hello everyone, my name is Christine Springer. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is about how Pluto accelerated my healing from narcissists and manipulators. So this is about my accelerated journey through healing from narcissists and emotional manipulators. It's only about what has happened to me. I'm not a therapist and this is not meant to be therapeutic advice, but I hope it brings you, the listener, inspiration to continue doing the work for healing. Now, this is not about hopium or toxic positivity. I'm not saying that things will magically get better on their own. We have to do the work. We must reclaim our stolen birthright of wholeness. No one else is going to do it for us. Now, the good news here is that we have so much support in the unseen right now. The evolutionary ascension process is offering us massive support for healing and breaking free. The breaking free process is also called the Great Separation. So, if you cut off your family and you feel like an orphan, that actually happened to me, then it means you actually have the ability to go forward alone, and you can trust that a new tribe of people will show up that will better match the person you're becoming. So, I'm finishing up a very long Pluto transit in opposition to my natal fourth house in Cancer. And the culmination was the opposition to my natal sun in late degrees of Cancer. So, I have four planets in Cancer. I have the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Saturn. And I happen to notice that, of course, Saturn represents the father, the moon represents the mother, Mercury represents my brother here, and the sun, which is me. My sun is at 25 degrees Cancer, 55 minutes. So Pluto is still very close to the opposition point. Pluto takes forever to move. It only moves about 2 degrees a year. So Pluto has actually gone over the opposition point 4 times, and Pluto is still close. He's on the other side of 25 degrees. He's at about 2753 last time I checked. So it's still an influence, but the way the influence shows up now in my reality is very different than it was a year ago. And there are so many layers on this story in my life about healing from these narcissists and manipulators. It's so multi-layered and complex, and I have so many insights about it, and I'm obviously not going to be able to get all of that into one post or video. This one is just about how Pluto kind of helped me break away from the narcs and abusers. So the fourth house represents your home, family, and foundation. And Pluto is often considered a transpersonal planet, which means it's about the collective. But when an aspect to natal planets, it feels intense and it's deep. Pluto is known as the destroyer, among other things, and it removes anything that's in the way of your evolution, and that includes 3D things. So Pluto has aspected every planet in my natal chart by a hard aspect in the last 20 years, except for Neptune and Mars. And I actually think it probably conjuncted Neptune when I was a child because I have natal Pluto in Libra at 4 degrees and Neptune is at 7 degrees of Sagittarius. So Pluto was conjunct Neptune. So the only planet that has not been touched by a hard aspect is Mars, but that's going to happen at the end of the Pluto in Aquarius transit in about 15 years. So Pluto opposite Sun has been the most difficult time in my life as far as personal growth. Now I'm almost 50 years old, I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm frankly very happy that this transit and this season of my life is ending. Aside from that, I'm glad that I understood about Pluto's effects and that I got this over early. Most women don't figure any of this out until they're almost 70 and then they feel like it's too late. Now, the thing I love about astrology is that forewarned is forearmed. I was prepared for this transit, even if I didn't know exactly how it would manifest. And not everyone is going to have a Pluto opposite Sun transit, so it is kind of rare. A lot of people who have this transit and don't understand the themes at work can be traumatized by it. Pluto can leave you feeling victimized and powerless. And the trauma in Pluto transits is usually because we have these things forced on us, and oftentimes we don't want to change. And so this is what's interesting about Pluto is I've seen a lot of astrologers talk about how you just have to surrender to the Plutonian changes. And that was not my experience at all. If you want to keep certain things in your life, you have to fight for them, and that pushes you back on yourself to decide how much it's worth to you to keep this thing. And I decided to fight for a lot of things, and it was a good decision. I was not going to voluntarily let go of anything that I worked hard for prior to the Pluto transit. And I emerged mostly intact with stuff that was important to me. Now, I didn't get to keep everything, and also remember, I'm Aries rising, and I'm very comfortable in doer energy, and I kind of enjoy conflict. And there's part of me, and I think there's part of all of us, and I think this relates to our inner child that feels like, well, I'm going to show you, or you're messing with the wrong person. And if that helps you figure things out, great. As long as you don't get too egoic about the whole thing, think that you have to go on a crusade to show these other people. I think you really have to be grounded in what's important to you. And so that's kind of the point of this whole Pluto transit is it starts pushing you around. You start noticing people in your life that are messing with you and pushing you around. And if you are already codependent, like I was, you kind of learn that you have to synthesize these things in your life into getting back into your own power. Now, Pluto cannot take away intangible things like experience, education, compassion, and authenticity. And these are way more important than homes, cars, and stuff. So ultimately, you get to decide what you want. And this is part of being a sovereign human being with free will. Pluto can't take away your free will. What Pluto usually will do when we're talking about issues of victimhood and powerlessness is fuck with your head. Now, most of the strange stuff that I noticed with Pluto transits was that it's a big psyop, psychological operation designed to mess with your head. And you either have to be the steamroller or you get steamrolled, and you can fall for the bullshit or you learn to discern through it. I questioned everything and wanted to be sure that if I was going to get shoved around, I was going to go in a direction I wanted to go. Now, because I was codependent and I've had all kinds of toxic people in my life, and I was groomed from a young age to put everyone else first and really to tolerate bad behavior from people, this Pluto transit really woke me up. And my mom did some horrible, horrible stuff, like calling adult protective services on me and trying to set me up to hold me back and prevent me from leaving and moving forward. And I remember at one point I had the epiphany that, this bitch is coming for me. And this is really hard when it's your mom. I mean, our mothers are not supposed to be like this. And I had given my mom the benefit of the doubt for almost 50 years. And then when this kind of thing started happening and I was investigated by APS, and I just noticed so many weird things, like it's almost like the hologram had a good daughter program running where there was so much, I felt like there was so much pressure to be the good daughter and to continue putting other people first. And I resisted. And the fact is with a little bit of a resistance, eventually it's like the program breaks and it stops running. So it's super important to not believe what you see and sometimes not what you feel. Meaning, if you feel like things are weird, there's probably something going on. So it's really surreal. This is the point of the mindfuckery under a Pluto transit. And I really think that that's all it is. It's designed to mess with your head, and you can either become a victim or you can dig deep for resources that you probably didn't know you had, or you haven't used them in a particular way before. And now you're being called to use your talents in a different way. So during this transit, I learned to stop letting time wasters, troublemakers, low frequency people come onto my timeline. So I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew that even though I couldn't leave, it was best for me to stay put where I was because I didn't have the money to leave because of everything that had happened. This financial sabotage had gotten to be so bad that I wound up homeless and had no choice but to go back to live with my mom. I had to move across country, and then of course the pandemic hit, and there just was no way to go anywhere because of the lockdown. And so I had to learn how to stay in this less than optimal situation, knowing that given the situation, it was the best option I had. And so I had to learn how to thrive within that situation. And I knew that I was being manipulated, but I had to learn how to stop allowing my buttons to get pushed. So many of us, especially women, have been manipulated so much and for so long that we don't even really know what we want. We're so used to being like a sponge and letting other people control us. We don't know that we're being manipulated. And sometimes I think we suspect that there's some things going on. This is what happened to me, but we're programmed to ignore most of it because that's just how that guy is, or that's just how that family member is. And they've always been that way, and we don't know any different, so we just never question anything further. But this is what's interesting about my family situation is that when I look back, I really see how I knew what I was going to do in this lifetime because I was prepared for it. And I'll bet if you look back, you can see some of these clues as well. So somehow I figured out at a very young age that there was something wrong with my family. I was reading things about shame and dysfunction early on. So my dad married my stepmother, and my dad had custody because my mom was unstable. My mom, in retrospect, was borderline personality disorder. So I wound up living with my dad and his new wife. And my stepmother set up some strange rules. Now, so most of the time, my dad didn't really do a whole lot. And it was like my stepmother was his henchman. It was like she did everything, overfunctioned, raised kids, worked full time, went to school at night, and in a lot of ways that benefited me. But my dad didn't do anything. My dad would come home from work, fall asleep on the couch till it was dinner, and then he sat there and watched TV. And as a result, my stepmother kind of took over. So she had these weird rules about television, and that the kids, meaning me and my two brothers, were supposed to be downstairs in the den. And so she called it a democracy, and I'm using air quotes. And so my two brothers basically wound up controlling the TV 100% of the time as long as they were home. So I was not able to watch much television, and my stepmother didn't want me upstairs watching the news and the things that I was really interested in. So I retreated to my bedroom and I started to read, and I read everything. My vocabulary grew, my IQ grew, and before you know it, I was figuring things out. So by the time I was a teenager, I was reading things about dysfunctional families that were really intended for adults. And I often think about how my parents probably thought that what they were doing with some of these rules would keep me suppressed, but they backfired and actually led me to freedom and learning to think for myself. And ultimately, that's how I was able to navigate this difficult Pluto transit. So my parents never asked me about what I was reading because they were just too self-absorbed. They didn't value reading or education, and later on, like within the last few years, I realized that that stuff was all intentional because they don't want the scapegoat reaching their full potential. Now, I obviously didn't see the whole picture at the time because I was a kid, and I was still living in the toxic family system, and children were just not wired to see our parents in a bad light. So we just believe that they are inherently good and they're going to do what's best for us. Now, I remember being at family events and being gaslit repeatedly by uncles when I would ask them about, my dad's doing this. What is that normal? And every single time they covered up for my shitty parents. So there's probably this push-pull. So I was being influenced by family programming and being immersed in the toxic family system. But these books were planting the seeds of revolution later on. And there are a lot more situations like this one that have clicked into place in the last several years, and now it all makes sense. So that's how when I look back, I realized that I knew what my purpose was here, even though I'm not consciously aware of it, right? It's been like the moon cars at Six Flags. So if you've ever been to Six Flags St. Louis, and this ride is gone, but the moon cars were like this car ride where you drove the car, but you never really got off the track. It was like this big metal thing, and you just drove the car around this track, and you sort of pretended like you were driving this cool little car, but the reality is you were never going to get off the path. And that is exactly what it seems like. So consciously, I thought, well, I'm going to get the hell out of here, get away from these people, and I'm going to go be a successful lawyer because I wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was a kid. And so even though I made a lot of decisions based on trauma, they weren't bad decisions. So I became a paralegal after having to go to court and testifying at my parents' divorce proceedings. And I was so influenced by that hearing that I decided I was going to grow up and protect mommies. And that is how I kind of wound up being enmeshed with my mom, is that at a young age, I decided she needed my protection. And so even though I made these decisions based on trauma, they were good decisions. And this is perhaps the best thing about doing this work right now and all the support for us in this ascension process is that you realize that everything turned out okay. Now, I'm not talking about hopium and minimizing trauma. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you do the work, you get to the point where you realize it's all okay. Now, seeing how I alchemized the bad into good, the things that we thought were bad actually turning out now to be pretty awesome. That we were good people, we were on the right track, and would have been in a different place if not for the abusers interrupting and interfering with us. And so fast forward to the pandemic and having to move to be closer to the dysfunctional family, and then all the family stuff came up and out. Now, I am not joking about this. Now, I can't tell you how many realizations that came up from the depths courtesy of Pluto. I started to know things about my family, whether I had asked to know them or not. I would just be sitting at my computer, excuse me, and all of a sudden I'd get this flash of insight about something shitty that happened with my family that would come out of nowhere. So, the other thing I mentioned earlier, Pluto does force you to stand up for yourself. You're either the steamroller or you get steamrolled. And sometimes it seems like you have to go extra far distance to deal with these people because level 1 steamrolling doesn't get them to back off. So you feel like you have to go to like level 10 and just completely flatten the asshole before they finally get the message. And this is part of the Pluto transit as well. Pluto will back you into a corner with these mind fucks, and you feel like you're the one going crazy. That's part of a Pluto transit. And you finally have to find your own self-confidence in your center, and you realize it's not you, it's the crazy shit going on in the people around you. So, as I mentioned, I was not able to leave this dysfunctional situation with my mom because of the pandemic. And a lot of people find themselves trapped in situations with abusers. And to be honest, it was perplexing to me because I'd never been trapped anywhere after I left my father's home. I'd always been able to earn enough money and stay away from most of those kinds of people. And I really recently realized that the way I did that was through hustling. And that I'd been hustling extra hard to escape having to ask for help. And I was hustling my way out of trauma, running away from it. So during the most intense period of the Pluto transit, I noticed that a lot of just weird mindfuck type situations that were so surreal that they really seemed to be fake. Now, I can't tell you how many times I felt like I was walking onto the set of a sitcom. I knew the lines, I knew the part I was supposed to play, and the whole thing was just the energy. The situation was set up so that it just seemed like the most natural thing to do was to continue being dysfunctional. And it was so weird because you stand up for yourself or you don't fall into the old pattern, and then the whole thing collapses and gets really, really weird. Now, with my mom, I'd walk in on her, I'd go to the grocery store and come back, and she would be on the floor. There would be blood everywhere. And I just got to the point where I'd know that I was supposed to freak out because, that's would have been a normal response to a really fucked up situation, but I had to do the opposite. So I got to the point where I started expecting her to be in some disgusting, gross setup that was designed to trigger me. And I had to learn how to navigate around all of that stuff. So it just was a big psychological operation. And when I finally realized that it's just part of this Plutonian process, that I don't have to fall into those dysfunctional patterns, I could actually start to use the situations primarily to grow in my self-confidence, healing, and transformation. And so what I eventually realized is that I was prepared for the Pluto transit, not because I understood astrology, but because I was able to recognize patterns. So I also realize now that the Pluto opposition time period is really the reason I'm on this planet. And it's happening now because it's time to settle up karma and separate from lower frequency people as part of the overall evolutionary ascension process that we're going through right now. So because the peak of the Pluto transit really only lasts a year, it felt like I was being shoved through this process, like being birthed. And so I used this time period to practice boundaries, increase my self-esteem and confidence, surf the waves of becoming more empowered. I realized I had a lot of tools in my toolkit, my previous history with therapy. I knew how to read and I liked books and I was good at learning on my own. I had a good education and a successful legal career. Now, I had also been in the military, and it was hell being a woman in the military in the 90s. This Pluto opposition was way easier than what I went through in the military. So, the other thing I want to mention, logic and reason are your friends during a psyop. A lot of people keep talking about how we're not going to use our analytical mind, and that's just a bunch of baloney. You have to be able to discern the crap in the ascension process because there are still assholes and people, beings in the unseen that don't have your best interests at heart. And they will interfere with you. But we've been weaponized that seeing is believing. And so it's a weird mix. So now you have to use logic and reason with the unseen. And that's a really interesting idea. So, but once I figured out the theme and patterns in my specific situations, and even though I wasn't able to leave, I really decided to just engage the fake psyop. And I started to have a little fun with it. So I'm pretty sure that my mom had some like demon attachments. And so I started using these mantras. I started using like the Mool mantra and these mantras from Dave Sarup. I think that's her name. I can't remember the third name, but she has some songs that I really liked. I like Daniel Bolone, Jay Bolone. He's got a new song out called Ganesha. And I just started learning these mantras. I love the Mool mantra. All of these mantras are called fate killers because instead of being knocked around by the external world, you're stepping into your free will and declaring what you want. And so they say if you do the Mool mantra 40 times a day for 40 days, it will change your life. And that is exactly what I experienced. But also, when I knew that my mom had these attachments, when these things would come over her, I would start singing, and it would just irritate her so much. She would be say like, "You're listening to that Hindu music again, and it sucks." And I remember one time asking her, like, "Oh, I guess your demons don't really care for songs about God. So, too bad. They can go away." So every time I would notice these weird psyop vibes, or I felt like we were under attack from something that was interfering, I would just start singing mantras, and they would leave. So I had my own fun messing with these dark beings and my mom. I learned to be in joy and let her be where she was on her own emotional frequency and not let it affect me. I had friends. I had a huge garden. I mean, I really did what I could to take advantage of other things so I could get a break from the constant battle for control with my mom. And this, interestingly enough, was the complete opposite of what therapists will tell you. The mainstream therapeutic advice is, hey, just get away from these people. And I had to do the exact opposite because I realized that I had been running from trauma for most of my life, and that was through hustle culture, grinding, working myself to death, putting other people first. And I'd just been interfered with and disrupted and groomed to have this sort of life of instability by my family trauma. And like I said, I got to the point where I realized the best thing for me was to stay where I was at the time and grow through the situation. And my family didn't care what I wanted. They just wanted to suppress, distract, divert, interrupt, interfere, drain, and manipulate me because I was the scapegoat, and it was all just so they could feel better about themselves. And I just had to stop allowing it. And to be honest with you, I was tired of running from assholes. I mean, I'm not running from these people anymore because I have to stay on this timeline that I'm on because it's the highest and best for me right now. And even though I couldn't leave, it just worked out that it was the best thing for me to stay put in this situation. And so I had to grow through the process. Now, I'm kind of touching on these issues at a higher level, but some of the deeper issues, the general issues, are I just stopped believing assholes and I stopped being afraid of them all the time. Once I kind of got the pattern, the people that, the program running in my hologram was just designed to mess with my head, I just realized that everything was fake. Fake demands that I do this and that. The scary part was standing my ground in frightening situations, but ultimately it turned out that my instincts were 100% correct, and anytime I did not listen to myself, I wound up getting screwed. And so finally, I just paid attention to my intuition and combined that with logic, and everything worked out great. And I noticed that the more my family triggered me, the more I looked at patterns, the more pieces clicked into place. Notice repeating patterns in all of my family members, and as time wore on, the chaos was predictable. I mean, narcs and borderlines, they manufacture chaos and drama, but when you step back and you pay attention to what they're doing, you know what sets them off, and you know when they're due for a dramatic outburst. You know they're going to pick a fight with you before you leave the house. If you don't give them that opportunity, they're going to set you up for some drama when you get back. That happened to me over and over and over with my mom. And so ultimately, the situation taught me that I was expected and pressured openly to continue being the scapegoat in my family. And almost everyone in my family has a form of narcissism. And I'm not just talking about my family of origin, I'm talking about my whole extended family, full of narcs, borderlines, flying monkeys, enablers, and codependents. And so I realize now that this situation happened for me. I'm not a victim. I was liberated. And I'm actually really happy the way I handled it. I have no regrets. And just remember, Even when you're not having a Pluto transit, there are plenty of people who have a vested interest and want you to remain in victim consciousness. And I'll talk about this victim consciousness in another post. This has been a long one. I appreciate you listening. If you stuck around, please like, share, and subscribe if you feel called. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.